And so when it comes to a process, number one is you have to have most of the details figured out before you even start to go into it. Because if you're, you don't have to have 100% of all the details lined up. But if you go out to start looking for a position and you don't know what you want to pay somebody or what even the job title is going to be or what the responsibilities are going to be, it's really tough to start figuring that out throughout the process.
Welcome to the first episode of the new year of 2026 to Aleph Ventures TV. And today I'm excited to have joining Jason Thompson. He's the Director of Recruiting at Mitsoka & Company. And for a lot of people, Q1 is all about hiring salespeople, project managers, leaders, general managers, all kinds of stuff. Really excited to have him on and talk about that. We'll probably get into this. Aleph has been a very happy recipient of his services, and so we know that he's a wealth of knowledge. But without further ado, Jason, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Haakon. Looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome, bro. You have been in the painting/home services world for like 20 years or thereabouts. So I thought maybe give us your bona fides a little bit here, man. How did you find your way into like the painting industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in southeast Idaho, Pocatello, and I was at the time going to school for a finance degree at Idaho State. And I actually got a random email asking if I wanted to run a painting franchise. And at the time I deleted it because I'd never painted before and had no clue what it was all about, but something inside me was curious. And so I found the email a couple days later and followed up and ended up being a college pro. So was a college pro franchisee 2007, 2008, and that just kind of launched a career in home services.
I think you and I on previous calls have talked about this. The listeners, if they've listened to a couple, this is the college pro mafia, right? That thing just spit out so many good people. So college pro, cut your teeth. How about maybe just recruiting specifically? Like, how did you eventually find yourself in this world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all kind of stemmed from just a love for people. So I was a franchisee for a couple years, went really well. Got promoted to be a general manager, and so I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2009 for more of a career job working with the franchise owners. And so that was when I really started to interview for, I guess, something different than a painter, and started to get into really people's backgrounds and what makes them tick and who they are and what makes them operate. So I was in that role for about 5 or 6 years, and then ended up becoming the U.S. recruiting manager with College Pro through just a love of getting to know people and helping the right people find the right opportunities. I think it was like the core of what kind of led me into recruiting.
Love that, man. So I want to have a conversation just around hiring process. And I think that maybe that's like a place to start of talk to me about, like, obviously, you guys have your particular process, but part of that is like process you bring versus process that you embed yourself in, right? Companies can have kind of different process, but I think this is like something of like a maturing that I've seen of a company of oftentimes a busy owner operator. It's like, if I got to hire people, they kind of think of like the interview, but just maybe like take us back like further. What should people be thinking about before they get to the interview? Like that really of like having a process of getting themselves like to an interview. Like what sticks out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that, well, first, I get asked a lot from business owners, what's the candidate pool like right now? Or, is this a good time of the year to hire? And I've always been a believer that it's always a good time to hire. And there's always good people out there, but it just takes a lot of work to kind of make a good mutual fit. And so when it comes to a process, number one is you have to have most of the details figured out before you even start to go into it. Because if you're, you don't have to have 100% of all the details lined up, but if you go out to start looking for a position and you don't know what you want to pay somebody or what even the job title is going to be or what the responsibilities are going to be, it's really tough to start figuring that out throughout the process. And so, and that I think that leads to a lot of unclarity and just kind of winging things and kind of figuring stuff out as we go, which leads to people leaving and, high turnover, things like that. So, as far as a process, it would be kind of knowing what you're looking for, knowing the basic details of the job, and knowing the timeline of when you want to have somebody in the position, what you can afford to pay, some of those basic details. And then we can get more into the process, but having kind of a multiple step process to help us decide if everything aligns, and then also help the candidate decide if everything aligns on their end. That's something, having multiple steps to really get to know somebody is helpful.
Could you maybe speak to maybe comparing and contrasting? You you work with all kinds of companies across the country and then even different industries too, but like the companies that you work with where you're like, I love working with these guys, it's clear, like solid process versus where it's maybe a little harder and challenging. Just like compare and contrast those companies. Like what's different about them?
Um, Probably organization would be in any company out there can be organized, even if it's an owner operator, one person kind of doing everything, or if you've got 100 people in your organization. Um, all of them can be organized. And so I think the ones that don't have a clear process are just putting out fires left and right. They're kind of, they're reacting to a lot of situations versus proacting and being thoughtful and making business plans and actually getting ahead of some of this. And then I'd say the ones that do have processes would be just that, it's not that complicated. It would just even be mapping out what the interview steps look like and who's going to be doing what. And do we even have an offer letter once we get to a point where we've got somebody that we're considering? So it's just, thinking through the details ahead of time versus just, reacting when a fire happens.
Yeah, I think that's a good proactive hiring versus reactive hiring. I'm sure anybody listening, it's like most of the time, if you're the best hires typically are going to come if you're being proactive, if you can organize yourself to get to that place of like being proactive rather. But
Yeah.
like even just you just mentioned, having an offer letter. Maybe go into that of like, obviously there's going to be, just like all companies, there's going to be different levels of maturity of a company if you're hiring your third employee versus you're hiring your 50th. But what would you say is like, regardless of where you're at in your journey, regardless of the size of your business, like what would be some bare essentials in that process that you would commend to a
Yeah.
business owner?
I would say, so we always start with what we call an intake meeting, which is basically where we start to work through all the details of the job. So in an intake, we would figure out, again, what's the timeline of this position? Are you looking to bring somebody on immediately? Do you have 3 or 4 months? Do you have 6 months before you're ready to put this person into place? So thinking through a timeline, thinking through realistically how far away can this person live to be successful in the job, and that could depend based on the responsibilities of the role. How often are they coming into the office? How often could they work remote? Can they work remote? Things like that. What's a day in the life look like? What sorts of responsibilities is this person going to have? What are the deal breakers? What are things that I'm not willing to accept? And then what are some of the gray areas where, I think I could work with this person, assuming they checked these other boxes. So thinking through that, thinking through compensation is a big one. We always try to work in ranges. So instead of having like a set base, if we can have a range that gives us more wiggle room with a candidate. So knowing, what's the low end on what you're going to pay, what's the high end, where we're going to come in at there. Then once we know just the details of the job, then we want to make sure we've got a good job description. And a job description has to have enough information to give the person, enough information on what they're getting themselves into or what they're looking into. But it also can't be too much information to where if they read through it, they think they know everything. So we try to ride that line of like, making sure the job descriptions look good. Actually, most candidates are looking off their phones nowadays. So making sure that your job description's actually set up for like mobile devices, so it's short, it's more bullet points versus long paragraphs, works out well. So you've got a good job description, and then even we do a phone interview. A phone screen would be one of the first steps on our end once we start to generate candidates, and even having a script for what you're going to say in that phone interview. Because if you're winging it, then that's just where things start to kind of go astray. And then I want to have the
Mm.
same, if I'm recruiting for one position and I'm going to talk to 20 people for the one position, I want to have a very similar conversation with all 20 of those people. And I'm not like talking different details with every person. So having that phone interview script, that would be the starting point. And then from there, it's just generating candidates, knowing, what steps do I want this person to do? Do I want to, meet with them remotely initially? After that meeting, do I want to bring them in person? Or are we going to do another remote meeting? So just kind of having that thought through. Do I want to do a ride along or have them come out into the field or visit the office? Just what sorts of steps, and then who's going to be involved? And then once we get to the finish line, do I have something prepared to where I can get it into their hands? Because time kills deals. So, once I start to get somebody into the process and I start to move them through it, I've got to make sure that I've got a plan of, how long that's going to take. And then once we get there, am I ready to, present to them what we need to present?
That's super helpful. And I'm curious, I think this obviously becomes more relevant to as a company gets bigger. If you have a sales, like if you have you're hiring a sales role and you have a sales manager, you're hiring a project management role and you have a director, a production director or something like that. But in that process, is there anything, like what would you say is okay to be like sourced out to some degree, to, like you guys or others? But I think, is there something that you would say a business owner or whatever whoever's hiring always needs to own a certain component? Or because I think hiring is one of these things where sometimes it can be like, ugh, I just need the person. Like you can over outsource that. I think if you're not careful. But I'm just curious your take on that, just as
Yeah.
somebody who is outsourced too. Are there times where you're like, hey, we shouldn't be the ones to think about this or do this?
Yeah, I would say a couple definite things that the owner should own would be just the details of the job, the pay, what the responsibilities, because at the end of the day, they're reporting to your business, so need to know the details and the pay, and make sure you're good with that, and you don't have somebody on your team promising compensation that you can't actually commit to. That's just going to make the company look bad. And then outside of that, I would just say they need to own the decision, whoever's involved, whether they do it on their own or if they bring in a recruiter, that by the time we get, our job is to present qualified candidates to business owners. Ultimately, they still get to meet them, see if they like them, and they get to make the decision. And so that's what they got to own. I think that could work for painters or project managers, sales reps, or general managers. It all depends. It's okay for an owner to outsource any of those roles, but at the end of the day, it's still their decision who comes onto their team.
I think that's great, man. And I think we talk about this in marketing, like in terms of marketing, where marketing can kind of at times be that necessary evil for business owners. It's like, I just want the leads, like and I want to just find somebody to like solve that problem for me. But then if you have that kind of attitude, it just induces all kinds of bad behavior where you're kind of hands off, or you're not that concerned. And then all of a sudden, it can get squirrely. I think just, yeah, if you have that mentality where you are owning the hiring decision, I think that posture will lead an owner to kind of keep tabs on the right things and be, I think that's just a really healthy posture to have.
And then I would also add on top of that, they would need to own the experience of the person once they come onto the team. And that doesn't mean that they're doing all the onboarding and the training themselves and they're out in the field doing all, the actual, the buddy estimates or whatever. But they do need to make sure that they've got the right people in place for that. Because one thing we find is, and somebody, I just need that person. Just go get me someone that's sold a million, and I just need to get them out there as quickly as possible. What I've learned over the last few years of recruiting hundreds of sales reps is we can go find a great sales rep, good attitude, ambitious, driven, all excited about the commission. But if we just throw them out in the field, inevitably something's going to go wrong. And so it's really about training and coaching. And so we used to have kind of a funny joke in college pros that, if they showed up to the interview and they had a nice smile, like, okay, like we're going to bring this person on. And now in our recruitment, it doesn't matter any position that we go after, whether it's a frontline position like a painter or an installer, or if it's a sales rep or a project manager or somebody that's going to lead that whole business, we always start with values first. Are they a values alignment? Values, are they going to be excited about the position? And then we'll get into some core traits and abilities that we look for. Can they control their emotion in the pursuit of a goal? Are they detail oriented? Do they have a preference to lead others? Can they lead themselves? Can they lead a business? Are they a goal setter? Do they have grit and tenacity? That's the core of what we'll look for in any individual. And then we'll start to get into experience. Do they have the right experience that we need for this role? But after all that, once we find that right person and we bring them onto the team, they still have to be led the right way and treated the right way and that sort of thing.
That's so good. That's so good. I want to circle back on something you made a mention of, like you're a big believer that it's always a good time to hire. Flesh that out a little bit more. Like, what do you mean by that? And maybe too, like, is that in any way kind of fighting against a different way of looking at it, or like a different attitude about hiring?
Yeah, there's more that goes into that because I was actually on a team meeting earlier and I told our team, hey, we should be going after home service businesses right now and construction businesses because they're ramping up for their season. And there is a little bit of seasonality to the business, not necessarily to the candidates that are out there in the market. So right now, especially for a lot of our painting partners, we're in a big push to get sales reps on within quarter one because typically in a lot of areas right now, there's a lot of snow on the ground. There's not a lot of people out there knocking doors or doing in-home, like they are doing in-home estimates, but we're not really focused on exteriors too much. And so we want to have that person in place by March-ish so they can start to get some experience and then get out in the field and have a full runway to go hit a sales goal for the year. So there is that. And so there's going to be certain timing. Sometimes in Q4, people are starting to think about kind of, if they're thinking about new opportunities, they might be thinking about kind of finishing off a bonus structure with the idea of kind of starting something new in January. So there is some seasonality and some timing around that. Going back to where I said, I think it's always a good time is because people will ask, like, should I hire in the summer? Should I hire in December because all the holidays are happening? And I usually tell them, yeah, for sure, if you need the position, because there are people out there looking, usually all the time. Like there's always people out there if we go look for them and find them. So I wouldn't not hire. If you're in a position where you need somebody, I wouldn't wait until a certain time of the year. You just got to go put in the work. But that goes back to the business planning and being organized and knowing, okay, at what times of the year do I need to bring these people on?
Yeah. And yeah, I was thinking about that leading up to this conversation. Just people need to understand the compounding effect of stabilizing your business or not. So if you have, and I was just thinking about this for like a sales role, let's say, if you have a core process that is identified, documented, and tested and refined, well, just in the day to day, I have something that I can measure against. In theory, right? If you don't have that, you don't necessarily, have that to measure against. Well, okay, let's say I have that, but I don't have clear data that is kind of clearly telling me performance of individuals. So I might have a great process to measure against, but I don't have any data with which to do it, right? And and then if you don't have those things, the thought of like outsourcing a hiring process where it's like, hey, what are you looking for? And what's important to you in this role? And all those things, it's kind of subjective and it's like, what are you feeling or whatever? And so just the compounding nature of, being disorganized, your business not stabilizing. And I think just in a, growth, people are always so worried about growth. And it's just like, man, growth is obviously important. You got to grow, but like how you grow and what are you growing is super important because of just the compounding effects of these things throughout the business.
I think the key word that you mentioned is data, and knowing your numbers in any part of your business, that's going to help. Because even for us on the recruiting side, we've got numbers and metrics. We know that if we go send 100 direct messages, we typically get back 30 to 40 interested candidates. And we'll put a lot of work into making sure that we're prospecting for the right resumes. Because if we're going to get back 30 to 40 candidates, hopefully they're somewhat qualified and then from the 30 to 40 candidates, we know that we're going to schedule 25 to 30 of them for phone interviews. And we know that about 20 to 25 of those are going to show up, and we're going to move, 15 to 20 of them to a video application to ultimately behavioral interview about 4 of them to select the one person for that job. And so that kind of helps us, because if we meet somebody 2 or 3 phone interviews in and we think they're the right fit, we might want to put the brakes on that person a little bit just to like make sure that we're still talking to more candidates. Because I've for sure had that experience where I said, this is the person. And then we keep interviewing, and then a week or 2 later, somebody that's even better comes along. So there's that play too of not making the decision too soon, but then also knowing, okay, if I've done 20 calls, or if I've had 20 good candidates and it's like there's something up. Is the payoff? Is our messaging off? Like, what can we figure out? And it's all in the data.
I love that. I want to talk about like the interview, and probably this is going to be like if an owner, has or a leader has good process, they know what they need, they know what the performance looks like, they have good data to validate like that, they're clear on the comp, it's competitive, all that stuff. They have a good outsource, process. Still, the interviews is those, especially the later rounds, right? Those are going to be things that they're still going to own for the most part, be engaged in. I'm curious, just your thought of like, is there such a thing as like a good interviewer and a bad interviewer, in the sense of just personal makeup? Like how much do you just think that like there's a process that you run to have an effective interview?
Process. There's going to be people that potentially have some more strengths that are going to lean towards them being a good recruiter. If they're personable, if they're empathetic, those are going to be like good traits in a good recruiter. They need to be assertive. They need to have some sales skills, because you got to be able to like get somebody excited for a job. But those are also all things that can be learned and trained. I would say when it comes to a good interview, just some of the key points of a good interview. Number 1 would be preparation. And that's a thing in our company. Show me your prep and I'll tell you how the event's going to go without even seeing the event. And so that would be a big thing and preparation for an interview would just be looking at all the past notes and data. Have I read their resume? Have I looked up their social media accounts? Have I prepared certain questions? So I want to go into the interview kind of having all that thought through. That's probably one of the most commonly missed steps of an interview, is actually preparing for it. And then we could get into the interview, but there's key points of probably another one of the most important parts of an interview is actually building rapport with people, kind of establishing some common ground, building some connection. Everybody in today's world is very on guard, and they're very they're trained to say what they think you want to hear in an interview. So the more you can actually get through that shell with somebody, kind of, build some rapport, share a little bit about myself and who I am, get to know about them and their family. And you'll notice that kind of that barrier starts to kind of like wither through. And then from there, stuff that we really focus on would be asking open-ended questions. So a good interviewer is going to ask open-ended questions versus leading questions. What do you enjoy doing outside of work? Do you play sports? It's like that's a yes or a no question, and it kind of puts somebody in a box versus just open-ended questions. And then listening and probing. And probing would just be asking additional questions, follow-up questions, because everybody's going to give you surface answers. And then what you got to do is listen and then probe down, peel the onion back to really start to get to know somebody.
Do you have any go-tos that you personally that have worked well for you? And I feel like these are going to be probably personal, but for opening people up, like, is there any like go-to questions or stories that you like to share to get past that guarded shell?
For sure. And this goes all the way back to in-home sales and painting and being able to like establish trust with a homeowner and get on the same page. That's the nice thing. All these things are very common in everything that we're doing. And so building rapport, we always use the acronym FORM: family, occupation, recreation, and money. Those are 4 topics that you can really start to get to know somebody. And so I would that prep's going to help because I can look at somebody's resume and I can see, where they graduated school from, or potentially where they like grew up, or I can see if they graduated high school in Minnesota and now they're living in Phoenix. That's an easy, cool. How long you been living in Phoenix? I live in Montana. And so just having some questions just to get to know them: family, occupation, recreation, and money. Occupation would just be, how long you been in the painting industry? And I'm not interviewing them yet. I'm just trying to get to know them and like kind of establish some common ground. Recreation would be, hey, what do you like to do outside of work? And that's a go-to for me because I love riding bikes and skiing, and so it's kind of fun just to learn like what people do outside of work. And that's a true way. I'm not interviewing them, but I'm listening to them and I'm getting to know them pretty well through rapport. So I'm getting some questions prepared from some of this rapport, but really that's not the reason. It's just to get some trust. And then money would be just, what do they like to do with do they spend it on dirt bikes? Do they spend it on huts to put on the ice for ice fishing, stuff like that. And then what I have learned from doing this for so many years is that in general, people don't like to share about themselves. And so that's one of the most missed things when it comes to rapport, is because the interviewer, if you're trying to establish rapport and you're asking, well, what do you like to do outside of work? Where's your family from? How long have you been living there? It starts to feel like an interrogation to somebody, versus if you can make it a two-way street. Oh, cool. Actually, I have some family there, or I grew up there. Then they'll start to open up because the candidate wants to hear about you more than they want to hear, talk about themselves. So, and I actually listened to a phone interview of one of our recruiters earlier today, and I thought he established great rapport. And at one point he shared something about himself and he said, oh, I shouldn't have shared that. And I told him I actually thought that was one of the best parts of the whole call, because you could almost hear that guy like start to open up to you. So to be good at that, you have to have 2 or 3 things that you can share about yourself. And those are your easy go-tos. For me, it would be I live in Montana. And that's like, I find like people are like, oh, cool, Montana. And then it's just an easy rapport topic. I love to ride bikes and ski. So that's something and then I can talk about dogs and like my dogs and that sort of stuff. And those are always easy go-tos.
That's good. Good stuff, man. Yeah, I think that's something that every interviewer aspires for, of like having a sense of like, am I really getting the real, right? Am I really getting to know this person? And I think even building that confidence through rapport in the front end of the interview, it just helps you. And I think even too, I feel this too when I think about my history in sales. If I have really good rapport with somebody, I tend to be more assertive because I feel like I have the relational equity to do that. And so it's kind of like building rapport builds your own confidence. You need to execute on that confidence later on in the interview, but it's super good. I'm curious too, just more broadly, once digging into the obviously there's going to be specifics depending on the role that you're hiring for whenever you do get into the like meat and potatoes of the interview, but maybe more broadly, do you find that there's like are there things that you think owners are worried too much about in interviews, and then things that they just don't pay enough attention to? Is there
Yes.
anything in those two categories that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think they're too worried about experience, somebody having done the exact same job before. And what they're not paying enough attention to are the soft skills of somebody, and just how they show up and how they, and that's why we recommend the multiple steps of an interview process, is because it's really hard to get to know somebody in a 1 hour meeting. And one time I got one shot to get to know this person, and they should be at their best, so they should show up on time. They should be dressed the right way. If you're working with a good recruiter, we're probably gonna like give them a little bit of direction, to say show up and be looking sharp and make sure you're there a little bit early, stuff like that. Um, and so I don't recommend just doing the one interview and making a decision. So go into those soft skills that we are looking for would be, are they showing up on time consistently? We'll have them do a couple different application steps. And if somebody tells us, well, I already did that, or I already answered that in something else, it's like, that's just not a deal breaker, but it's going to kind of tell us how people respond to stuff. Can they follow a system? Can they show up consistently? Um, how do they speak? Do they make eye contact? And again, like it depends. Like I'm going to have more for an installer. I don't care what they wear so I'm not going to hold that to them as much, but it is going to tell me a little bit of something about a person. So I'm paying attention to those things. And
Yeah.
us, what I guess I think we're all paying attention to longevity in past jobs, and do they stick with stuff that they do? Do they put some effort into the stuff that they're presenting? As far as, does their resume look nice? Does it look like they put some effort into it? Does it have spelling and grammar errors, or have they checked that stuff? Those would be the little things that we're looking into.
Yeah. That's good stuff. I think the experience piece, yeah, the transferable, that's the other thing too. I think understanding the soft skills of, again, this even goes back to process. If you don't have a clear process, if you don't have a sales process, you don't have SOPs, you don't have a company culture, you don't have some of these things really ironed out, um, then that's going to even inform like what experience are you really evaluating, right? Like what are you even looking for in their experience if that stuff is not like super dialed in? And then it's like, well, they have to have the exact same job, right? That's really what you kind of default towards. And you obviously, in our experience, especially now at this point for sales, rarely are we hiring a salesperson that has sold paint before. That is almost the outlier at this point in a lot of our businesses, but it's because we know what we're looking for.
And one thing to add, and speaking to that, because working with Aleph, one of our most organized partners that I always trust bringing somebody into your organization, because I know that they're going to get taken care of the right way, and they're going to get trained, and they're going to be held accountable to the right things. So I think that's important. But something else, and this is some of the best owners that I've worked with, they also, something to pay attention to in the interview would be just, do you like this person? Could you, outside of work hours, could you go to dinner with them? Could you sit down and have a meal with them and enjoy that time? Because something for us, it's about, we like to have fun in what we're doing. We're building a business. There's issues that come up. There's problems that we get to solve, but we look at that as a good thing. But if we're not having fun when we're doing all this, then it's like, what's it even worth? So that's something to pay attention to as well.
Yeah, good stuff. And I think too, this I was thinking of process wise. I was talking to somebody where they were um, great business owner. He's super sharp. He recently, I think he did between like 1.5 and 2 million in revenue. He's going for $3 million in revenue, which in a residential painting company, that really just the way that these roles kind of play out, that typically represents, all right, you're really starting to build a team here. Couple different salespeople, 1 to 2 project managers, you got admin staff, etc. And he was kind of asking me like, what is the biggest thing to focus on? And I threw out field coaching of, being a good Dave Richley disciple, trying to be anyways, where it's just like, I don't know, as I've seen, like, if you're smart enough, I think you're going to like pay attention to the right things, and you're not going to screw up. It's like field coaching, that experience piece that you're talking about. I think that is the thing that's going to just most naturally get pinched because it's time intensive. But to the point that you're saying of like having a solid process in the interview where you can see how they show up in multiple phases, I think too in the onboarding, if you just go hard and you sprint at onboarding for like 2 weeks, anybody can show up for 2 weeks. It's their first 2 weeks. They want to impress. They want to whatever. But if you have like a 90-day thought out, plus onboarding process, that person might get sick. There's probably going to like have a cold during that time, or a kid is going to like, maybe there's going to be some family thing, or it's going to rain one day. It's going to be sunny one day. There might be a holiday in there. How do they respond around half weeks? And right, there's just like different elements of working life that you get to like really experience.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just like go hard 2 weeks and then you just hope for the best the rest of the year, it's like you just don't know who you have on your team. And so again, kind of that process, like I like that, seeing how people show up.
Yeah.
Super important.
Yeah, and speaking to that first 90 days, because I'll get asked too, we've got a 90-day replacement guarantee. So if we hire somebody and they don't work out within their first 90 days, we'll come replace that person at no charge. And so people always ask, why 90 days? How am I going to tell if somebody's going to work out in 90 days? And it's an easy answer, is because we do all the work on the front end to actually vet people and make sure all the expectations are clear, and make sure they know what the pay looks like and what the schedule looks like, and what some of the challenges are going to look like. And so we come into this and we have multiple steps, so we're not just winging it and like, hey, let's test them out and see if this works. Because for anybody that's tried that can cost a lot to test people out in many things, from upset customers to paying additional recruiting costs, that sort of thing. And so once we take the right steps to make sure they're a good fit and make sure this is a good fit for them, that's just as important. If you want to be a good interviewer or bring people on that are going to stick around for a long time, it's got to be just as much about them as it is about us and our position. Is it a fit for them? Is the pay going to fit for them? Is the schedule going to fit for them? What if they take their kids to baseball practice every afternoon and they want to be a sales rep? Can you commit to the appointments that you need to do to be successful in this job? So we want to think through all that, and assuming like that we've kind of checked all those boxes throughout the process and we bring somebody onto the team, they might not go sell $1 million in their first 90 days. So we're not going to know for sure what they're going to finish at in sales, or, all the details of how they're going to lead crews or what their margins are going to look like. But what we can see is, are they showing up on time every day? Do they have a good attitude for the most part every day? How do they react, like you said, when stuff doesn't go their way on a rain day? We're going to start to see that in people. And then, if they're new, and even if they've done this before, you're still bringing them into your organization. So we got to give them some time. But it's going to be those little things of like, are they like what's in their control? And are they doing the best with the stuff that's within their control? And if that's the case, the rest will probably figure itself out.
Love that, man. This has been great. I appreciate you taking some time to come and chat. How, if somebody is curious about reaching out to you guys, hearing a little bit more about your services, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. And we work with all types of home service contractors. We've got a very strong background in the painting industry, so we love helping business owners find the right people and grow and scale businesses. I always tell people, for us, it's not about the hire. We're not a staffing company. Our goal is to partner and help business owners stay in business, grow their business, or even get ready to sell their business once they get to that point. So we're more in it for, the actual, like, what are they in it for? And let us help you get to the next level. We work with all sizes of businesses, from the owner operator that's just getting started to the 1 to 20 million to $100 million commercial painting company. And so we kind of work with all sizes of business. We've got a few options, from a direct placement where, if you need one specific hire, we'll go find that person and take all the work off your plate and do all the process steps that we talked about and just make sure that we're, helping you find the right person. Or if it's a larger company and you don't want to pay recruiting fees for every position that you hire, which I would understand, we've got a pretty cool program called Rent a Recruiter, where you can actually rent a recruiter from us on a month-to-month basis and go fill volume of positions. So if any of that is interesting, it's Mitsuoka and Company, Mitsuoka and Company, and it's just mitsuokacompany.com, or Jason at mitsuokacompany.com. Or you can always reach out to Haakon or any of the Aleph guys, and they know how to find us.
Awesome. We will likely put a link to the website in the show notes. And I can absolutely vouch. Olive works with you guys and our partners, and it is obviously, we're all about partnerships, and we work with you guys because we sense that, and you guys have been an awesome partner for us. So if you have needs, these guys are good people and good partners. So appreciate it, brother. We'll have to do this again. Best of luck on all these positions that you're going to be working on filling in Q1, and we'll talk again soon.
That's good. We're optimistic for 2026. We're all going to hit some goals together.
Love it. All right, brother. Take care.
Thanks, Haakon.